It's no secret that the Timberwolves have been really underwhelming this season, especially because the Rudy Gobert acquisition was expected to be a move that, while potentially an overpay, was at the very least a net positive in terms of increasing Minnesota's playoff ceiling. Right now, it seems that they are significantly worse than they were last year. Right now, they're trying to perform a really difficult balancing act between offense and defense. With Rudy Gobert on the court, they have an offensive rating of 104.8 and a defensive rating of 110.6. But with him off the court, they have an offensive rating of 122.7, but their defensive rating goes to 115.8. So they literally have to choose between having an effective offense or an effective defense, but right now, they can't seem to do both of those things simultaneously. But there is hope. As a matter of fact, Chris Finch has stumbled onto a couple of things this season, either by design or by sheer luck, that could be the difference between this team going from where they're at now to being competitive in a pretty difficult Western Conference. I want to look at this one particular lineup as an example, and this is not me saying that this lineup should be getting the majority of minutes every single night. It's just an example of what they're capable of. Now, this lineup has an offensive rating of 158.1 and a defensive rating of 93.8, giving them a net rating of 64.3. That's the fourth best offense of any lineup in the entire league with at least 15 minutes played together this season, and also the fifth best net rating. Now, what is this magical secret weapon lineup that's been demolishing opponents when they're on the floor together? Jordan McLaughlin, Jalen Noel, Anthony Edwards, Taurean Prince, and Naz Reid. Now you might be asking yourself, how is this their best lineup? Because in theory, shouldn't it be Towns and Edwards together, or even having Gobert sprinkled in there somewhere? This is where we can start talking about the idea of fit. Fit is really funny because, like Minnesota's balancing act between offense and defense, there's a fine balance to be struck between fit and talent. Too much talent can create stagnant offense and issues with sharing the ball. Too much fit, and you start to sacrifice the quote-unquote star talent that you need to win postseason games. I believe that this lineup strikes the perfect balance, and it just hasn't been used enough. Another reason that I think this lineup works so well is because of the idea of continuity. There's really something to be said for having good roster continuity from year to year, even if people don't like to admit it. It's the same reason that the Clippers struggled their first year with Paul George and Kawhi, because there was a clash between the new regime and the old guard. And it's potentially why we're seeing the Timberwolves look like a significantly worse basketball team this year than they did last season. But when you look at this lineup, you can start to see where I'm going with this. McLaughlin, Noel, Edwards, Prince, and Reid, these guys are all part of the Timberwolves' quote-unquote old guard. Their other two most used lineups contain at least one new player with Kyle Anderson and Rudy Gobert, and their numbers reflect one of two things. They are either yet to learn how to play together, or they have a lack of fit. Okay, so I know I'm probably losing some of you guys with all of the numbers and philosophical stuff, so let's look at some examples and try to visualize the difference between what's working for the good lineup and what isn't working for the bad lineup. I'm going to show you two separate clips, and I want you to spot the differences between the two. So look at this possession. And now look at this one. Look at this possession. And now look at this one. Now, the easy takeaway from these clips is going to be, oh, D'Angelo Russell is terrible. And, for the most part, that's not wrong. D'Lo has been, by pretty much every possible metric, eye test, and standard imaginable, pretty terrible this year. He had a big game last night, which is awesome, but the problem is that these big games for D'Lo are becoming more and more rare. And more often than not, you're getting the worst version of D'Lo rather than the best version of D'Lo. And the Timberwolves right now can't afford to take that gamble. But from a more bird's eye perspective, there's just no system at play in this starting lineup. If we rewind a little bit, Edwards is just standing in the corner, resigned to the fact that D'Lo is going to ISO this possession away, so there's not really any motivation for him to move off ball to try and generate offense. But when we rewind to this lineup, he actively moves off ball to the weak side corner, opening up space for Reed and Noel to execute this pick and roll, and Edwards made it so that Noel doesn't have to deal with Devin Vassell providing help on the interior. Anthony Edwards starts walking back on defense on this possession, once again knowing that D'Lo is just going to put up a bad shot. But on this play, he's passing and relocating, helping shift the defense and create space for his teammates to get open looks. Another thing that I want to talk about is their transition offense. This is a young team. Young teams like to get out and run in transition. D'Angelo Russell is a ball stopper. Ball stoppers stop your offense. Slow offense means laziness. Laziness means lower defensive intensity. Lower defensive intensity means fewer opportunities for defense to turn into offense, rinse and repeat. It's not a surprise then that the Timberwolves score 116.6 points per 100 possessions in transition with D'Angelo Russell off the floor, yet they drop down to 109.6 points per 100 possessions in transition when he's on the floor. D'Angelo Russell is a ball stopper. Jordan McLaughlin is not. Jordan McLaughlin, for the most part, has a pretty good understanding of what he is and isn't capable of. Most importantly, he plays within himself. McLaughlin is not focused on scoring the basketball the vast majority of the time. More often than not, he's making the extra pass or driving so that he can kick it out, being a cog in the machine, working diligently to keep their offense moving. His energy and unselfishness plays to the strengths of Anthony Edwards and Towns, who we know both like to score the basketball. McLaughlin gets it into their hands, and he does it without many stupid decisions and dumb turnovers. Now, am I saying that a guy like Jordan McLaughlin should start over D'Angelo Russell? Well, maybe. At the very least, they need somebody who plays more fluid within the offense and operates as more of a connector between Cat, Edwards, and Gobert. Somebody who is constantly making something happen with the ball in their hands or giving it up to somebody else if there's nothing that they can do. D'Lo doesn't have that mentality. They were expected to be a good pick and roll team, but D'Angelo Russell has not been good at passing in the pick and roll. When the Timberwolves have Jordan McLaughlin on the floor with Edwards, Towns, and Gobert, and D'Lo is off the floor, they have an offensive rating of 125 and a defensive rating of 120.7. Yes, that defense is pretty horrendous, but at least their offense is outscoring teams, which is better than a negative point differential. When you have D'Lo on the court with Edwards, Towns, and Gobert, and McLaughlin is off the floor, they have an offensive rating of 105.2 and a defensive rating of 109.2. So yes, defensively they're better, but it really doesn't matter how good of defense you're playing if your offense isn't putting up more points than you're allowing. This is where we're at. Jordan McLaughlin is more of a positive right now than D'Angelo Russell. The Timberwolves just can't continue with this experiment with D'Lo. He doesn't function well with these guys at all. Per 36 minutes, Jordan McLaughlin averages fewer shots, fewer turnovers, more assists, and fewer fouls. Now, is that going to change if McLaughlin is given more minutes? Maybe, but that feels like a risk that Chris Finch might have to take because the alternative is trying to make it work with D'Lo, which at this point I just don't see happening unless there is some drastic, unexpected change with D'Lo's level of play. Anthony Edwards averages 22.8 points per 75 possessions when he shares the floor with D'Lo. He averages 41.8 points per 75 possessions when he shares the floor with Jordan McLaughlin. Cat averages 27.2 points per 75 possessions when he's on the floor with D'Lo. He averages 33.3 when he's on the floor with Jordan McLaughlin. Rudy Gobert averages 21.9 points per 75 possessions when he's on the floor with D'Lo. He averages 23.8 points per 75 when he's on the floor with Jordan McLaughlin. Do you see where I'm going with this? Now, there's an elephant in the room. All of this criticism of D'Lo doesn't excuse the terrible defensive effort and communication that we've seen from the Timberwolves throughout the year so far. Building a defense around Karl-Anthony Towns has always been about doing whatever you can to try and minimize the impact that his defensive weaknesses have on your team's ability to get stops and force misses. When being integrated with Rudy Gobert, that really hasn't been allowed to happen. There's just not a feasible defensive lineup that's emerged yet that indicates Cat can be hidden defensively when playing alongside Rudy Gobert, at least not one with any meaningful sample size of possessions. But Chris Finch, either by design or by accident, actually has managed to stumble on a couple of instances where Cat was successfully hidden on defense. Unsurprisingly, it's lineups that provide a surplus of defensive versatility. Lineups where Cat can either camp out in the paint and wait for rebounds, or where they have the length to cover for him if he gets beat off the dribble. This is where Jared Vanderbilt came in so handy last year. He was the recovery defense for Cat. Now, Gobert is a good help defender, but of course, you're going to give up a ton of threes if you expect Gobert to try and guard the perimeter and the paint, and Cat just isn't good enough of an interior defender to accommodate for that. So it's unsurprising that the Timberwolves are giving up the third most three-point attempts in the NBA with 39.1 a night, and teams are shooting 37.5% from three against them, the fifth best efficiency in the NBA. So what's my proposal? Stagger Gobert and Cat's minutes. You can start them together if you want, but at a certain point, you need to make the switch from running them together and instead run them separately in lineups that work well with both of their strengths and weaknesses. Of course, Edwards and Cat are not without blame here. They have shown their fair share of laziness on the defensive end, and they'll resort to the same type of hero ball that D'Angelo Russell does at times. But in my opinion, these things are a symptom of the illness rather than the illness itself. I've already shown you how tuned out Edwards is on the offensive end when D'Lo has the ball in his hands. So it doesn't really surprise me that he wants to get his shots up when he finally has the opportunity to do so after watching D'Lo ISO for the last 5 possessions. Does that mean it's the right thing to do? No, but it's not surprising. This carries over to the defensive end more than people seem to acknowledge. Defensive intensity can be sparked from offensive success. You want to get the ball back so that you can go to the other side of the floor and score again. Do I think it's good that Cat and Edwards often look disengaged on defense? No, absolutely not. But do I think they'd be more engaged if the offense was functioning better? 100%. If the Timberwolves want this Rudy Gobert thing to work, one of a couple of different things needs to happen. Either D'Lo needs to play more within himself and stop putting up bad shots and focus more on facilitating and moving the ball and moving off ball to help open things up and generate good looks for everybody else. Or they need to reduce how much they're using D'Lo and start maybe playing a guy like Jordan McLaughlin more, or going out and getting a point guard that's more conducive to their offensive success and that maximizes their strengths. Part of the blame lies on Chris Finch for not integrating a system like he did last year that did a good job of generating offense. And it could just be an adjustment period, but right now it's looking pretty rough. Is it that simple? Maybe, maybe not. These are just numbers. When put into execution, this could all flatten out to be just as bad with or without D'Lo. But to me, this is the first thing that needs to be addressed if the Timberwolves are going to try and make this Rudy Gobert thing work. These are often really complex issues, and it usually doesn't just come down to one player or another, but sometimes one thing can change, and it solves most of the problems that a team was having. Look at the Boston Celtics last year. D'Lo could completely turn things around and start playing more within the offense and operating more like he was last year, and if that happens, awesome. But really, this is the first thing that needs to be taken care of if they're going to try and work themselves out of this slump. Sometimes to prevent the boat from sinking, the whole boat needs to be rebuilt. But sometimes, all it takes is for someone to put a piece of duct tape over the hole at the bottom. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe and leave a like. If you didn't enjoy it, leave a dislike and tell me how wrong I am in the comments. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.